My name's Shaun, or as I'm becoming more commonly known these days, is by my Instagram handle, which is Knackered Knackers, and that very much is sums me up. My balls don't work. Something which I was to find out in a very life-changing moment, really, when I was 2017. So let me take you back. I'll try and summarise it as quickly as I can. But my wife and I started trying to conceive when we'd been married about 4 years. 2017. Decided it was time to try and grow our family, and the months rolled on and on and on, and it wasn't working. So we went to the doctors at the end of 2017, and we were both referred on for tests. In January 18, I received a phone call that was literally life-changing. It was from my GP surgery, but who it was from the doctors, I still to this day don't know, but all I know is that it definitely wasn't it wasn't a doctor, and it probably wasn't a nurse. I think it was a member of admin staff, because they obviously had not really any medical training. They were asking me they told me I had to go for a second sperm analysis in 3 months' time. And I said, like, why is that then? And she said, I don't know, it just says here that you have to do that. And it says because you've got, and then she stumbled over this word, azoospermia. She kind of said, azoospermia. And I was like, well, what's that? And she said, I don't know. So I said, okay, thanks. Booked in the next test 3 months down the line, and went on Google, and to find out that azoospermia meant that I had zero sperm, like none. And I was like, hang on, men have millions of these, tens of millions. How can I have not even one? So, yeah, it was a mad moment, and I very much went into shock at that stage. I phoned my wife, told her. She was like, well, let's go home. Like, I'll see you at home. She was at work as well. And I said, no, it's fine. I'll just pop back into work and I'll see you at home later, which essentially was shock. And it's like that word that, so it's, I was 34 at the time. So that word, which for 34 years I hadn't ever heard before, suddenly became the word that was to define me there onwards, really. And like, for example, her saying come back in 3 months, and I'm like, well, why 3 months? And she couldn't tell me that, but I was then to find out that the sperm regenerates over a 3-month period, roughly between about 76 days and 90. But this is all stuff that I was having to find out through Google. And I went back 3 months down the line, and the result was the same. And therein really started a long process of essentially grief. It's like I was losing something that I took for granted, and that was my ability to pass on my genetics, like my DNA, have a child easily and naturally. But also I was losing this picture of a life that my wife and I had envisioned. I didn't know I was going through grief. I was just, for the next kind of couple of years, bouncing around all these emotions like anger, blame, depression, denial, definitely. And I didn't know this, but in hindsight I could almost pinpoint and signpost each bit, and because they are the first four of the classic elements of grief, in no particular order. You kind of go between them all. And yeah, it was a difficult time. It's like being thrown into a river, and that river is the world of infertility. Suddenly you're being introduced to all these new doctors, going to clinics, and there's a whole new glossary of terms, all these new words, all these scientific and medical words that you've never heard before. And that river at times is fast flowing, it's pulling you under and you're gasping for breath. And there are other times where it just comes to a standstill and you're just bobbing there thinking, well, what next? And that was essentially the whole of 2018 for us. Was that standstill was trying to navigate the NHS system of funding for fertility treatment, which is a postcode lottery. It's jumping through hoops, trying to wait for appointments, which are often months apart. And in this whole time, I'm really grappling with losing my sense of identity as a man, my ego taken like the biggest hit it ever had, because society really, for men and masculinity, it's often wrapped up with our virility and our ability to kind of sire children and all this nonsense, which at the time I wasn't seeing it as nonsense, but obviously now, after a lot of internal work, I realise it is. 2019 came along eventually, and I underwent the first of one, but if it didn't work, 2 operations. The first one didn't work, so I then needed the second. The first one was relatively minor. It's called a varicocele embolization. So it was established that I had a large cluster of varicose veins above my testicles, and they essentially overheat the balls. The reason that they hang a bit lower than the body is because the optimal temperature for testicles is about 2 degrees lower than body temperature. However, these big veins overheat them and damage sperm production. So I had a relatively minor operation to try and shrink those veins, and then wait another 3 months for the sperm regeneration process to happen. Had another test, and that again was negative, which was probably our lowest point, actually, that one, because we had put a lot of hope into that first operation. We just thought, that's nice, quick, easy, half day in the hospital, come back out, rest up for a bit, and then we're going to be good to go. It wasn't to be, and that meant that in August of 2019 I went for the nuclear option. I had my balls cut open, which is a much bigger operation, under general anaesthetic, where they essentially cut each of your balls open. Well, the first one they do, and if they find enough there, then you don't need to do the second. But for me, there was nothing in the first, so they go on to the second. And yeah, with that one, the result was immediate after. As soon as it came around, the doctor and nurse were stood there saying, yeah, there was nothing, I'm afraid. And that was that. That was the last chance saloon for me. I had been very reluctant, actually, about whether I was going to... It took a lot of consideration to figure out if I was going to have that operation or not, because it was major surgery and it can have lasting side effects. For example, decimating my body's own ability to make testosterone, leading to potentially a life on TRT, which happened, which I am now. But I did it. I'm glad I did it, because what came with that was a lot of closure. And we then pushed on from there, and again, after a lot of soul searching, kind of really figuring out who I was as a man, as a potential father, we chose to pursue our dream of becoming parents by using donor sperm. And we started with that at the end of 2019, which then kind of moves into the traditional IVF, where the baton was massively then passed to my wife, and she was undergoing the injections and that daily grind. And then she became very poorly. I'm laughing, not because of her becoming poorly, but just because of the ridiculous situation of, we finally thought we were getting somewhere, and then suddenly she became extremely poorly with what's called ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. And then we had to pause for an indeterminate amount of time, just until she got better. She got better around February 2020, and we were given the green light to go ahead the next month, and we were due to start, and then 2 days before we were due to start, lockdown happens. So everything again put on ice, and again for an indeterminate amount of time, which was the nature of the world then. It was all the big unknown. Eventually fertility clinics were allowed to reopen in May 2020, and we were in the right kind of time of her monthly cycle to crack on, and we did, and we had 2 embryos transferred, and they stayed. They decided to hang around, and those 2 embryos in February 2021 became our twins, Ray and Evelyn. And life has never been the same since, for many wonderful reasons, and for some not so, like extreme sleep deprivation. But yeah, and that's kind of, I've tried to summarise it as quickly as I could, but it's like 4 years of pain and heartache. And this whole time, like I've mentioned, my ego was taking a massive hit. My identity as a man, I was looking around for other blokes to speak to read their stories, to hear their stories. Nothing, absolutely nothing, silence. So it made me feel like I was the only man that had ever gone through this, because there was no one talking about it. And you get told these stats from the doctors of like, 1 in 6 and all this, and it's 50-50 male and female, like kind of attribution to fertility issues. And I'm like, well, it can't be, because there's no other men talking about it, so I must be the only one. And I just felt compelled to do something about that, and to start spreading awareness for it and being that voice that I needed. So I started sharing my story, and it's just taken me places that I never could have imagined, really.
Wow. Man, that's amazing. I mean, what an honest, vulnerable, and beautiful personal story, that now gives us a great bit of context behind the conversation we're now going to have, and the guy that you are and the things you do today. So thank you for sharing that. It must have been a whirlwind of trials and tribulations, and yeah, crushed hopes and successes, and it's just amazing to hear that you are in a setup now with your own little family and everything that comes with that. Yeah, I mean, Jacob, do you have any thoughts before we sort of move further on? Because that's quite impactful.
It's like you've finally won now. It's like everything was everything that you've went through is now worth it. And I just really admire the fact that you're empowering that journey, and uh, and being the brave one that is speaking about it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think.
Go on.
So, thank you. It took a long process of evaluating things, and I make it sound like it's almost overnight the way I talk about it in 11 minutes or so, like that. But I started reframing it like, this hasn't happened to me, it's happened for me. And you kind of figure out that there's a choice in how we deal with everything, and do I let this drag me down and crush me, or do I choose to thrive in spite of it?
Yeah, I think that's amazing, man. And getting the context and learning a bit more about your journey is maybe even more excited. I mean, excited is the wrong word, but motivated to have this conversation because of how important this topic is on a personal level and for the people listening. Because as you've got vulnerable, I'll get vulnerable, right? I would say that your situation, in terms of getting to that point where you want to start a family and realizing that that's not something that you can do in the traditional way, is a big fear of mine as a 20-year-old man coming up in this world. And you hear these stats about how the average 20-year-old now has the testosterone of a 60-year-old back in the 1950s and things like that. And you hear that and go, well, I'm a 20-year-old now, and I don't have control over sort of the fact that all the food I eat is from supermarkets, and there's all these chemicals in the air that are affecting my hormone levels and things. And it's like, you can feel a bit lost in that world. Along with the fact that, and I never thought I'd be saying this over a call that's then going to go onto the internet, but going up through puberty, and I'll give you a bit more context actually because it might help. But when so I have a disability called cerebral palsy. You might have heard of it, and I have that very mildly in my legs. But during year 7, when I was like 12, I had a major operation where they had to basically like reconstruct my knee because I've walked with like a crouch throughout my life. And I hit this big operation just as puberty started to emerge. So it's my theory, I've never actually gone to like a professional about this, that operation disrupted my adolescent development in a way, in ways that I may not be aware of. But the one I am aware of is only one of my balls dropped, right? And I think this is why, or something that maybe fuels that fear in the back of my mind about my fertility. Because I hear these things about temperature, and that's the reason your testicles are in a separate part from your body. And I'm like, well, only one of mine dropped, so do I have 50% of sperm, and all this kind of question. So that's a bit about me personally, to get vulnerable about why I'm actually looking forward to talking to you and why I think this is such an important topic. So that being said, I want to go through a couple of things that me and Jacob have made notes on that we've heard people talk about regarding male fertility, maybe on other podcasts from people that maybe aren't the as well versed as you are, or maybe just people we've spoke to day to day, and go through them a little bit with you from your own knowledge, whether they are true and correct, and what people can do about them. People like me and Jacob, the people listening, can do about these things, if that all makes sense to you.
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you for sharing what you've been through, and it shows actually, you know, your strength of character to be where you are at 20. It's refreshing to hear that because I can tell you, I was not in that frame of mind when I was 20. I didn't know my arsehole from my ear roll, essentially, and all I cared about was where the next beer was coming from. When I essentially what was is believed to be my cause of infertility is I had mumps when I was 22. I was extremely poorly, and my balls swelled up like really big.
Wow.
But my concern was, after being bedridden for 3 weeks, was I going to make it to Magaluf? Because I had a holiday booked with my mates. So I'm really pleased that you guys are not just looking into this for yourselves, but are spreading the message for other people, because that's what will change this. And some of the things you said are true, like about the kind of testosterone levels of people these days, because of endocrine disruptors that are in the environment, our food, like you said, and pollution and stuff. Sperm levels are half of what they were in the 1970s now. So the parameters for, like, quote unquote normal sperm counts now are a lot different to what they used to be. And all signs point to the fact that in the next 50 years it's going to get even worse because of the lifestyle we lead, this culture of convenience, the fast food being readily available every turn, Deliveroo and all that. You know, it's office-based roles, and we'll go into it more. But you know, and what I would say is undescended testicles, for example, is something that can lead to issues. So I would definitely advise, if you have any concerns, to go and get checked. Not to scare you too much, but the fact that you're aware of it. One did descend, so I hope for the best for you. But it's the fact that you're doing this and you're educating yourself shows that this is probably something that you've considered.
Can I just jump in then? What is one descending? Is that an issue, because that means that the sperm in that one won't exist or hasn't developed?
So I have to heavily caveat anything in this respect that I'm not medically trained in this. I'm a patient advocate, essentially. So I will answer to the best of my knowledge, but I will have to heavily caveat the fact that it's this is based on my kind of lived experience of having talked to hundreds of other men or interviewed experts for my podcast in the area. So just kind of things that I've picked up, but essentially, I hope that with the one descended testicle that it is functioning as normal. With the other one, it's undescended testicles, certainly ones that aren't diagnosed and picked up early. Like I know, for example, with my son, it was something that was checked early, very early. But I think in previous generations gone by, it might not have been picked up by healthcare professionals for baby boys, but now it is something that is checked more frequently. But yeah, definitely get that checked, because it's the one undescended that could be an issue. But hopefully with the one that has, everything will be okay.
Yeah, man, thank you. Like my main intention, I think we'll add a nice structure to the next sort of half an hour, 45 minutes or so, is to come away with a sort of toolkit of these are the things that are definitely adverse to our fertility health, and these are the certain habits and things that will aid us, right? So we'll get started with one we've sort of mentioned. Let's talk about temperature. So obviously, I know that the reason that the testicles are in a separate section of your body is because they have to be, as you said, 2 degrees, I think, lower than normal body temperature for optimal sperm production. So could you maybe give us some tips or things that you've learned, or advice, or maybe some actionable things that people can do to sort of look after that? Because I think to myself, I'm a para athlete, so I play wheelchair basketball, right? Which means I'm strapped in a chair, very heavily strapped into this chair for multiple hours on multiple days a week. And I'm thinking to myself, it's probably not good for my one ball that I need to survive on. So any thoughts on the temperature point and any guidance you can give to me and Jacob and the people listening?
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, absolutely. In that situation where you are in a chair, it is there's no getting around it. Your testicle will be well sandwiched in between your thighs, getting warmer. But that the same can be said for office workers, of which I am. For 8 hours a day, sat there with our balls right by our warm thighs. So that is modern society, and it's part of the reason why things are not going well for sperm health as a population. So there are ways around that. Well, I say ways around it. There are ways to manage it, but the best way is still kind of, if you can, get up and move and get kind of try and give it some air, so to speak, but just by moving the thighs apart. But there are cooling underwears that you can buy, where you can insert little ice packs, or other ones where you can put your testicles inside a separate pouch, which takes it away from the thighs a little bit. Other things like saunas, hot tubs, hot baths, excessive use of any of those is not good, because of the raised temperatures. So again, just regulating that. Exercise. What kind of like underwear are people wearing? And actually, outside of exercise as well, people that wear those like kind of tight-fitting briefs, like old school pants rather than boxers, is something that is known to draw the testicles too close to the body. Again, put them too close to that heat source, which is not good for them. Again, as I said, exercise. If you're wearing jock straps or sports boxers type things that pull them up too high, just think about how often you're wearing them and what you're doing in that time. Cycling is a big thing. My podcast co-host is a male fertility PT, so he researches the hell out of everything, and he was saying that all the current research was cycling, because for some people, when you're going through, if you are going through a fertility struggle and you are really passionate about cycling and it's something that really gives you a mental release, people are like, I don't want to give it up. Well, the research shows that it's 5 hours or under a week and you should be okay. It's really kind of long rides after that because of the pressure on that scrotal area. So that's kind of like from the takeaways for the physical side of things, like what you're doing or how you're sitting. Like I said, bath, saunas, etc. Just try and regulate what you're doing there.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I have to admit that's quite sad for me because I absolutely love the sauna. I mean, I probably only go like once a week on average. But yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? And people would probably can generally think about the extreme heat points like a hot bath, sauna, hot tub, etc. But the smaller things like just sitting and having that heat from your legs and the lack of air and movement is a factor that contributes. So that's a good thing for people to bear in mind on that point.
So
Thank
where
you.
when you heat the testicles up, that kills the sperm, right?
Yeah,
Oh,
it
okay.
doesn't necessarily kill them, but it damages their production. It can lead to things like DNA fragmentation, which has a huge knock-on effect to your chances of conceiving naturally, or other more tragic things such as miscarriages or baby loss.
Yeah, I mean the that sort of area isn't like commonly that a cold place though, is that? Like it must be getting hot like a lot of the time in the day.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, especially for people who are, we live as a, certainly in the West, a more sedentary lifestyle where we are just sitting around a lot more these days. Our fathers, grandfathers, they were in a lot more like active trades, but so yeah, it's managing that, even though, but this is all stuff that we kind of have been told before, but not from a fertility aspect. So we would have heard people say, don't sit in front of your screens in front of the blue light for your whole 8, 9, 10 hour shift. Is get up, walk around every 40 to 50 minutes, just get your body moving. That's great advice across the board for your eyes, your head, because people get headaches, from the blue light, from the from office lights as well. But it turns out that's also great advice for your balls.
Yeah, thank you. That's That's good things to know. And a sort of staying on that vein of the most prevalent things I've heard of, which is this idea of microplastics in foods we eat and the environment and the things we eat and drink out of, like plastic bottles and Tupperwares. And I have a feeling as this conversation's been going on that everything you're saying is going to scare me more and more because as a student athlete, I eat out of Tupperwares a lot. And I probably need to invest in glass, which is maybe one of the things you're going to say. But talk to me about that. Talk to me about this idea of microplastics. Maybe start with the environment, then move into plastic bottles, eating out of Tupperwares, packaging, and maybe plastics in food we eat, etc.
Yeah, yeah. So this I heard a stat that I think we eat the equivalent of a credit card a week or something in plastic. Through, I will. That needs to be verified, but I'm pretty sure it's around that level because it's in so much. So yeah, your main thing with plastics is heat is the thing that really releases that into the food. So typically you are okay with, like you mentioned, bottled water. It's where then if you leave that plastic bottle in the car and it gets really hot, that's where the danger comes from. If you're eating out of Tupperware but put it in the microwave to heat up the meal, that's where it's going to cause more of an issue. And things like chopping boards, like if we're using plastic chopping boards, there's going to be tiny little fragments, microplastics coming off on each chop again, and then you're scraping that into your food. So they're three things immediately that I would say to be aware of. And then the thing is, when you encounter something, let's stay on topic with fertility issues. You can go into these real rabbit holes of trying to live this like completely clean lifestyle. And when I say clean, people often think, oh, like no alcohol, smoking, and diet. But then the extreme version then comes down to things like tap water and what your food's packaged in, and what source, where's your food coming from, and organic or whatever. Every good doctor I've ever spoken to, whether it's from my own journey, going through it myself, or the ones that we've had on our podcast, or nutritionists, etc., they all say it's all about balance. You get the big wins, the ones that you can do, the quick wins, so to speak, but you can really send yourself loopy with trying to worry about everything because it can be so hard to get all that under control. So, like the headline things there that I mentioned, the heat and like chopping boards, things like that. Ultimately, everything that we buy is almost hard to avoid it coming in some sort of plastic packaging. But yeah, it's just wisening up as to what really then exacerbates the problem.
Yeah, okay. So as the sort of concise thing that we can take away is that avoid heating
Yeah.
plastic bottles,
Yeah.
plastic Tupperwares. Keep them out of the sun. Ideally, don't microwave them and use them in that way, and and avoid plastic chopping boards. Try the wood chopping boards are fine as a good replacement. That'll
Yeah,
do.
yeah, wood. I think wood's good. Glass is probably best because the other thing with wood is that this is away from fertility, but it's really hard to clean it properly with like in the grains where they get cut and perhaps seal back up a little bit because it's a natural thing, isn't it? So I did hear a stat that generally toilet seats are more hygienic than wooden chopping boards
Wow.
because they're easier to clean and they get cleaned more often and more thoroughly and properly, whereas chopping boards don't. So that's a nice little takeaway.
Talk to me about diet choices because I can imagine that the obvious one is going to be, heavily processed foods are going to be containing chemicals that disrupt your hormones and your sperm production, etc., etc. So I assume that that's correct. If you'd like to elaborate on that at all, that'd be great. But also, is there anything in terms of the typical, maybe not as processed diet choices that aren't best for our fertility, or are there things that are better for our fertility? For example, how does dairy come into things, and and red meat, and are there certain types of fruits and vegetables that we know are good for fertility? If you've done any research or learned anything about that, talk to me around those kind of things.
So what I learned personally, this is more hormonal health and balance, is when I hit my testosterone hit rock bottom, I followed a low glycemic index diet, which often diabetic people do, because it regulates your blood sugar. And when your blood sugar is not going up and down constantly, it's spiking and troughing, like peaking and troughing, not after having processed sugar, or that's what I followed, and I found that worked for me personally. But again, it's very subjective. And people will be delighted to hear in this bit, because we all know the answers here. Normal dietary stuff, it's what we all know to be right, but knowing and doing is completely separate. It's a balanced diet, and like if you're a vegetarian, vegan, then like there are ways of managing that. If you're a meat eater, then yeah, just balanced. Don't have too much of one thing. Ultimately, and again, we interviewed one of the country's top fertility nutritionists on our podcast, and even she recommends with her clients, if you're going to have a burger, make sure you bloody enjoy it. Enjoy every bite of it, and then don't escalate on the other side, which is just generally what you hear any kind of person who's into health, nutrition, they talk about, because living a life of a complete abstinence of anything that is bad for us, or bad for fertility, that's just miserable. And it's going to be extremely hard to maintain that for what could be years of trying, years of appointments and treatments. So ultimately, the cliches are true. That's why they've become cliches. But eat the rainbow, for example. Get as much nutrients in you as you can. That's straight off the bat. It's the more varied and colourful your diet is, the more nutrients the more nutrient rich it will be. Protein's good, like lean protein, absolutely. Kind of eggs, fish, meat. But again, fish, be careful with what you're having. Not too much mercury with the more oily fish. And things like antioxidants, nuts, walnuts especially, are good for fertility health. And other things like Brazil nuts are good, but you don't overdo it with those. They are full of selenium, I think it is. But I think the recommended daily allowance is around 3 of those. Like they are, but they are full of it, but don't overdo it. So yeah, just generally, and where possible, whole foods. Again, it's something we know. It's obvious, but it's often, as we know with food especially, the healthy stuff is more expensive. It's whole foods and organic where possible, because of what's being used on the non-organic stuff, the pesticides. But if that's not possible, because we have to acknowledge that budgets do come into play here, with the non-organic stuff, is just being careful with, like, are you washing it properly? A little bit of bicarb of soda to soak stuff in for about 12 minutes is really good at extracting pesticides, for example, from fruit and veg. Other things like things that are grown underground, for example, if it's non-organic, you're pretty much going to be okay there, because it's underground. It's not being exposed to as much spray. But even so, it's just good to wash everything, because of the process there's a lot more steps nowadays between farm to bowl or farm to plate. There's a lot more. Our grandparents era, those processes were a lot shorter. It was often local, a lot more nutrient dense soil and grounds. But now, with like the kind of mass farming culture that we're in, and us wanting the same foods all year round, even if they're not in season. So how far away are your strawberries coming in the winter, for example? So just being, it's with that, more so than any aspect of this, we all know the answers to that. It's just practicing what we know, which is often the hardest part.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I guess with all these bits of advice, doesn't it, always comes down to finding that balance for you that you can actually apply. But yeah, interesting. And kind of like I said, I mean, a lot of these, like you said, actually, a lot of these things are things people know, but they just need to find that sort of that spark of activation energy to actually apply it. And once you stay consistent with it and you feel better, then it's easier to maintain. I've
Yeah,
got two
and
more.
often it's
Sorry.
often it's having a big enough why to do any of this. We might have always wanted to go on a health kick and just not had that drive to do it for a few days, few weeks, but then bounce back. And that's why often these diets that come in, these fads, they're fads for a reason, because people go on them, they have good results, but then when you live that extreme diet for a little while, and extreme exercise, for example, then you just fall off the wagon and bounce back to where you were. Whereas longevity is the key, and consistency, and making small changes. But then when you've got that real drive, that real why to do it, which I had, for example, for kicking booze, which is a huge thing. I'd never done that before ever. Suddenly I had a reason to do it and to maintain it.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. I've got two more practical points before we go a bit more sort of spiritual and philosophical. Talk to me about tap water. Is it dangerous? Should I be worried? Should I be spending loads of money on bottled water?
It's never something I've changed myself, but all I'm going to say is I can see them now on my tabs on my computer. There's about 1, 2, 4 tabs for water filters because I'm going to buy one.
Mm-hmm.
Because now, as a father, I'm concerned for what is in that water. It's become such an issue, and I live in Cornwall. I'm surrounded by water which is often floating with sewage after heavy rainfall. I know people that get poorly, and I'm talking the sea here rather than drinking water. But actually, where you guys are from, which we spoke before you hit record, you had a big problem in the summer, wasn't it? A lot of people getting poorly from the tap water down there.
I got very badly ill. Yes.
Yeah, they were giving out bottles of water in Brixton. We went around.
Yeah, everyone got free water because of it.
Yeah, exactly. So I had I think it was probably about a month ago, our water was running brown, and so for about a week, so the water company said, run your tap for an hour, kitchen tap for an hour, take your meter readings before and after so that you can knock it off your bill. I did that. It was still brown for about a week. So boiling water, getting bottled water. So that was the real tipping point for me. And hearing what happened in South Hams over the summer, I was like, nah, I've had enough now. Like I'm going to take action. So I think for me, that's as good an answer as I can give, is that I'm going to buy a water filter because it's just got to that point now.
Yeah, it makes sense. No, it's something I think once you've bought the water filter, it's done then, isn't it? And it'll become like a task you have to think about when we're getting it and setting it up and first getting to use it. But once it's a habit, then it will just be like everything else. Just like you go to the tap to take a glass of water, you'll go from the filter and then refill the filter when it empties, and it will just become part of life. So it's something I'm going to look into as well. And lastly, are there any? I'm looking for like the key names here, because I'm sure there's research on many things. But are there any like the heavy hitters of suggested supplements that you think in the modern day people are most often deficient in, or could be most effective in promoting our fertility health? Things like, vitamin D, zinc, iron, all those sort of the tablet supplements that we can take. What would you most suggest?
Supplements is a real minefield, and it's one that people get really passionate about as well. I took all manner of stuff, and all I would say about supplements is that the kind of cheap ones that you get in supermarkets, it's essentially, I was told, it could be like buying the supplementary equivalent of a McDonald's. So I was going to a health shop and buying good stuff. Now, I'm going to avoid this. I'm going to take the political answer and avoid answering this to a degree, because I think it's highly personalised, and I think really the best way of going about it is having blood tests to find out what is going on inside your body, because they're called supplements because that they are not an answer. You don't. They're not like a magic pill that will solve all your problems. We don't know what's going on inside our body, so the best way of doing it is to get your full blood work done, see what you as an individual are deficient in, and then go from there. Because I think what I would hate to do here is give some advice that people take objectively, spend loads of money on stuff. I did the blood work, I figured out what I was deficient in, and I bought a good, well referenced, well put together supplement from the health shop after that. But it's crucial with supplements to realise that they, again, the reason they're called that is to run in line with a good, well balanced diet, exercise, sleep. That they are not going to fix issues unless you haven't got the fundamentals right. And for example, now with me, I'm not taking any because I'm so deficient in things like sleep, which then has a knock-on effect to my things like my caffeine usage in the morning and my how easily I'll go for sugar, for example, as a pick-me-up because I'm in the trenches with the age of my children. So I was talking at length to a friend about this recently, and yeah, because he's very much like myself, like we're kind of very into our like kind of own health, but yeah, that's what we joked about, but it's true, is that until I'm dialed in on everything, it's almost pointless. It would just be like wasting money. So, but yeah, it's get everything out, get the fundamentals, the foundations right, and then look to see where you're at, and if you can, get some supplements to aid, because there are ones out there specifically for fertility.
I wanted to ask, when you're feeling like you've got this problem, that you're the only one that's got no sperm, and you're repeatedly failing through this journey, what got you through like the tough times?
I had to peel back all of my layers like an onion. I had to get to the core to figure out who I was and rebuild from there, essentially, because it's those outer layers that I'd built, and those outer layers are like belief systems that are from growing up, from our peers, from our parents, who we tell ourselves who we are, often which a lot of which you're kind of basing on society as well. Like I was saying before, society telling us that men are the ones who can father as many children as they want and all this, and I had to strip that back, and a real key way in which I did that, because often it's hard to look internally, especially when you've never had to do it before. It's these big life challenges that often lead to people doing that. But I asked my wife, like, who am I? Why did you marry me? Why did you want to settle down with me for the rest of your life? Because how often do we ask ourselves who we are, but other people, who am I? What are my positive traits? What is it you love about me? And that was the real start of me getting back to square one and rebuilding from there.
Yeah, it's interesting that, isn't it? I mean, how much of our male egos is related to that, isn't it? These sort of primal parts of masculinity that are really, now we're in a world where that isn't, we have these technologies and procedures where that isn't doesn't have to be such a core part of our identity. And yeah, I think it's an important one to reflect on, because like you said, I mean, you were in a time where there wasn't people like yourself speaking up about this stuff, so you had to navigate that journey for yourself. Would you say that you've been quite a self-reflective person throughout your life, or was this the journey that made you look most inward? And did you have any sort of therapeutic help with that, or was it just, yeah, like you say, conversations with your wife and taking time to reflect? And talk a little bit about your experience of that, because just through talking to you, you seem like quite a calm, present guy, and you clearly you're following something quite meaningful through what you've experienced. So talk to me a little bit about, yeah, your self-awareness journey through this.
So yeah, I was never like that before this. I was just on the treadmill, the hamster wheel of life. I was working all week, looking forward to the weekend to sink as many pints as I could put down my neck on Friday night. Then like after work with colleagues, and then Saturday with my wife we'd go out for like dinner and stuff. It was, and then get to Sunday, be tired, be counting down the hours of the dread, go back to work Monday, and it was just like that. And like, you know, with interspersed with lads' holiday, stag do's. Again, I prided myself on always being the last one standing in the pub, and you can go hardest for longest and stuff. And I'm not sitting here slating that, because I loved it. It was great for a time. It was of an era for me, but what it meant was that I was never doing like self-work, personal development, all that. That wasn't even on my radar. Again, I say about scientific words and medical words that I was having to learn. I've had to learn all the new words like self-improvement. I never even considered that. They weren't really two words that went together in my vocabulary before. And like, for example, to kind of fast forward to the end quickly, but when I went through that and came out the other side as a better, more resilient, empathetic, caring person, I was getting stick from a lot of my friends. Not my inner circle, the kind of outer circle. From, you know, the hippie on The Simpsons. I don't know his name, but they were sending me like memes of him, like, oh yeah, Shaun's a real hippie these days, all about peace and love. But it's I think because, yeah, I'm like, well, would you rather just be cynical and like base layer, like man? Because I think deep down it was a reflection on them, kind of being envious of where I'd got to as a result of an adversity and overcoming it. So yeah, you mentioned therapy. I wish I'd done that. I railed against it because, and it's not the industry's fault. Of course it's not. But there were certainly at my clinic, because fertility clinics have to provide counsellors. They are free service for patients. I looked at the list of people and all I saw was ladies. And there's just nothing against their professionalism. I actually know one of them pretty well now. I've done lots of work with her. Amazing lady. But I was not in space to be talking to her. No way. Because, firstly, I'm not feeling represented. I'm thinking, well, where's all the men? Not necessarily having had to have been through it as a male counsellor or therapist, but I just wanted to be in a safe space with a bloke. But then on top of that, it was the stigma about counselling and therapy. I was already dealing with a massive dent to my ego. I had never had any therapy or counselling before. I was like, well, what will I be if I have that then? Which, of course, like, you know, in hindsight, is absolute nonsense. It's like, it's mental health, like, as we now know, because of the way the conversation's gone over the last maybe 4 or 5 years especially, is now being recognised as important as your physical health, and it's all very much intertwined as well. You get one dialed in, it makes the other more likely to come with it. But I wasn't in that space. I was like, no, that's not for me. Now, what load of rubbish. I just went inside and buried my head in the sand, wouldn't talk to anyone, wouldn't talk to my wife. Certainly wasn't going to talk to friends, thinking I'd be hanging myself out to dry with the banter and stuff. And it was a long, and essentially when I say I wish I'd done that, is because what I ended up doing, which got me through it, I essentially self-therapized. I read a lot of books. I started becoming really immersed in the world of personal development, listened to a lot of podcasts, and heard stories of people that have been through remarkable struggles and life-changing situations, and come out the other side of it, none of which were fertility stuff, because, like I said, there was nothing out there. But people that, for example, Henry Fraser, his book, without any word of exaggeration, his book changed my life. I don't know if do you boys know about him? So he was very much a typical lad, 17 years old, very good rugby playing family. His eldest brother, was a pro for Saracens. He was potentially on his way that way as well. He was on a lad's holiday in Portugal, playing rugby on the beach, and then they all went to go and cool off. He ran and dived into the sea and became paralysed from the neck down. And his story, I read it when I was literally still lying on the beach in France on holiday, recovering from my ball operation. I could still barely walk it. Well, no, I could walk, but it was very sore to go too far. And reading his story of perseverance through a life-changing situation, and resilience and acceptance was a crucial point of his story, and it pushed me a long way towards it in that moment. I mentioned grief earlier. The final stage of grief is acceptance. It's the hardest one to get to, the one that you don't unconsciously get to, you have to work towards. And Henry is just remarkable. I implore anyone listening to this to buy his books, listen to any podcasts he's on. He refused to give up, and he is now a mouth artist. So because all he can move is his head and above, he paints amazing artwork with his mouth. And so he started out writing words, and they became almost my motto. One of which was accept and adapt. I had that on my wall. It became every day I would look at it and be like, yes, that is me. And I had to drag myself through all this because, firstly, yes, the conversation wasn't out there, but secondly, because I was refusing to seek professional help because of the additional stigma on top of being a man and facing infertility.
Yeah, I think the human ability to grow from a difficult situation, it's actually called clinically, I'm a psychology student for context, but it's called clinically post-traumatic growth, which sounds like this paradoxical idea that you think, would that really exist? But it's actually a phenomenon that's been studied where someone faces an adverse situation, and through that it evokes a level of personal development beforehand they would never have had. It's like consuming just the right amount of poison that it doesn't kill you, but it makes you stronger, right? That classic phrase. And yeah, I can see it in my own life through things I faced with my disability or whatever. And that's why I'm, like you say, I'm a weird 20-year-old, that I'm interested in stuff like this, but it's the reason I have the view on the world I have, and the mindset and the dedication to the things I care about is because of hardships. So I think that's an amazing message for people to take away, and a great one to hear that you've gone through in this specific domain that you're in. And it's great that not only have you overcome this challenge, but it's actually improved aspects of who you are as a person. Do you know what I mean? Because now, beyond your fertility journey, you're probably a better father and a better husband and all those things because of it. And that's just this beautiful part of life, isn't it?
Oh yeah, I say that all the time. I'm a better man, and as a result, a better husband and a better father. But you might have seen me massively beaming with a smile when you mentioned post-traumatic growth, because I literally heard that for the first time earlier today. I love the intricacies of life and the things we end up doing and people we end up meeting, because I literally went, it was an online talk from a clinical psychologist, and I was watching it in the kitchen. My wife was milling around, and I said, "Did you hear that?" And she said, "What?" I said, "So post-traumatic growth is more common."
Oh, he might be back. It's all right. You carry on. It's still recording.
It's cool. Post-traumatic growth is more common than post-traumatic stress, but you never hear about it. And having been through all of this, and how have I still only just heard about it today? Like 8 years on from what I went through, but 4 years on from sharing my story. And I like to think that I've heard pretty much every Sam Harris thing there is out there, but then to hear that twice in one day is brilliant.
Yeah, wild, isn't it? It's weird how, for me as a student, I learn about concepts that I've experienced in a non-intellectual manner, and then it becomes given to me in a textbook chapter, and I'm like, wow, it's almost like reading a book you've already read, but just hasn't been put in that way, you know. And that's probably why I study this subject, because to me it's the study of life. It puts things that I've experienced and will experience as time goes on into context, which I find so meaningful. I'm interested in your thoughts on the future of fertility. Where are we headed? Right, we hear these very scary statistics, these headlines that are used in articles and YouTube videos and podcasts, etc., etc. where are we going? Are we going to continue to see declines in sperm counts and testosterone levels? And if so, do you think we're just going to decline and decline and decline until the human race is infertile? Or do you think there could be brightness in the future and maybe more and more conversations like this happen and people wake up and put more effort into their health and our systems change and that more sort of optimistic utopian point of view? Or do you think it's some weird mishmash in the middle? Tell me where you think we could be going in this area.
Yeah, the children of men scenario, kind of further down the line. That's what we all want to avoid. But yeah, you mentioned some of the more kind of tabloid-esque headlines. I was actually in a newspaper, I think it was last year, in one of the red tops, and like they interviewed me for it. But their headline was "Spermageddon," and yeah, some of my friends were like, "That's an interesting thing to come up with." I said, "That was not me," but what the journalist had done, and quite rightfully, the article was highlighting where we've come in the last 50 years with sperm counts halving, and where we could get to in the next 50. So you're quite right, is that we are at that turning point, and I am hopeful because of guys like you, and you are the next generation, and it's great. I mean, firstly, I didn't have, when I was 20, the internet was in its kind of infancy. I think realistically, like, people were still, I didn't even have a home computer then, I don't think, but if you did, it was like all these big, massive monitors, big tower block computer type things. Certainly no one, the early mobiles were about kind of flip phones and brick phones and stuff, but now people have a world of knowledge in their pocket, and it has led to your guys' generation being a lot more informed, and that message is spreading, and it's really encouraging because, so Kieran and I, who I do the podcast with, one of our biggest missions is to get into the ears of the people who need to hear this, who can make a change, because that message will spread. People are becoming more self-aware and are a lot more into health and fitness. I remember reading an article about city bankers in London, and how the trade is changing around that, where it used to be a kind of heavy booze culture. Nowadays they're going to work with their gym bag and a protein shaker because they're hitting the gym after work rather than going to the pub, and that's, things like that are encouraging. And yeah, it's about early education. Of my sex education at school all revolved around how not to get pregnant, and you were led to believe that if you even got naked near a girl, there's a risk. And I remember, like, my first few encounters, it was that fear of like, did it touch? And as you become an adult, you realise actually, even if you were actively trying, and of course that some people do have kind of that, you just get locked up without trying type thing. But yeah, generally it can take a little while, a few months. Like, most doctors won't even entertain people who say that they're not getting pregnant unless they've been trying for a year to 18 months, because there are so many different factors that align. But yes, all signs point to a very encouraging future with the kind of awareness of this, and it's getting out. What's really key is getting out of the fertility echo chamber, because I live and breathe this. I speak about it every day, and I see it, and it's echoed back at me all the time from the things that I follow, the people that I follow, etc., online. It's guys like yourself who are outside of that. And not last weekend, I think it was the weekend before, on the Saturday I was in the Independent newspaper, and on the Sunday in Sky News, and that's what we need, because it's getting into the laps. Like, for example, earlier in the year I was in Men's Health magazine. That's what we need, because it's people who wouldn't necessarily be thinking about it. It just gives that little nugget in there, and they might think, oh, do you know what, yeah, I might get tested. And it's, the earlier people are aware of this, the earlier they're making interventions, the better for everyone. And also, in general, in society, we are becoming a lot more aware that, especially in Britain, the kind of classic 2.4 children, like husband, wife, 2.4 children, that's in the minority now. Families are a lot more blended. Adoption donor conception, things like this, step families, very common now, and that is bleeding through to primary schools when people are talking about family trees, etc., which was really encouraging for me as a donor recipient father to know that my kids wouldn't be like different because it's so much more common now. Same-sex couples, for example, having children. So yeah, we live in a very exciting new world, and yeah, hopefully that change will come. It's a very long answer to your question.
No, I hope so, man. I hope so. From a personal perspective and from a collective perspective, it's a scary time when you hear stats like that. But I believe in the potential of humanity to figure shit out.
But it's not just. Yeah, of course, we've talked about all the things that can affect fertility for both men and women, like environmental factors. I mean, I didn't even mention alcohol, smoking, or recreational drugs. They are probably the three worst things, especially for sperm health, like those three elements. But also there are many societal factors, like people having children later in life because of careers and studies. So it's becoming more aware of that, because everyone's always thought, oh yeah, women have the biological clock. Well, so do men, actually. Unfortunately, celebrity examples of, say, the Rolling Stones having kids when they're like 60, 70, 80, that's not helped the myth that men that their fertility just never declines. It does. It also drops off a cliff at a certain age. And yeah, it's becoming more aware of actually, and this comes down to workplaces as well, needing to do their part by not punishing people wanting to take time out to raise their children, whether it's a female or a bloke, because that's then suddenly you're not being stigmatised or penalised for actually wanting a family earlier rather than just ploughing on with your career, and it's things like that which are really important too.
To finish, is there anything else? We'll sort of give you the mic if there's anything else you sort of want to say to the people that are listening.
I think just to any men that are listening, if you find yourself in a situation, is first and foremost know that you are not alone. Absolutely not. So the World Health Organization states that 1 in 6 people worldwide will face fertility issues, and that is completely indiscriminate of where you're from, your education, your financial background, your upbringing, anything. Is indiscriminate. You are not alone. There are literally hundreds of millions of people, other people going through this. I think roughly around 200 million men worldwide. So first and foremost, you're not alone. Secondly, okay, in my case with azoospermia, it was always going to be difficult. There was no sperm there from the outset. I tried. I had a couple of operations, it didn't work, but it's knowing that wasn't the end of the road for me. I've still become a father, and I would not change a single thing of what I've been through, because ultimately it's got me to where I am with having my children, to where I am as a person, which is stronger, happier, more resilient than I ever was before. But also is to know that an early diagnosis, which might be adverse, isn't the end of the road. Things can be changed. Lifestyle factors, like we've talked about all the way through, if you start implementing those, and there are sperm there to be worked with, you can have massive result changes in your sperm numbers and health.
If people want to find you, where should they go?
So Instagram's definitely going to be the best bet, which is at knackered_knackers, which is knackered_knackers, and then that links to pretty much everything else. So yeah,
Thanks for coming on and sharing your story. You're doing amazing stuff.
thank you. It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.